Good morning, Mr. Castleton.
My pleasure, Honour. This is the inquest into the death of Julie Fletcher, who I will refer throughout as Julie, who sadly died on the 8th of November 2019. And I can indicate to Your Honour this morning that her sister Daintree is present and participating via AVL.
Oh, I'd like to welcome Daintree and thank you for participating today, Daintree. I know it won't be an easy day for you, and our thoughts are very much with you today.
Your Honour, jurisdiction to hold this inquest arises because Your Honour has directed that it be held. An inquest is a public inquiry into a reportable death. The primary function of an inquest is to identify the circumstances of death. At the conclusion of this inquest, Your Honour is required by Section 81 of the Coroners Act to record in writing the fact that a person has died and to also record the person's identity, the date and place of death, and the manner and cause of death. There are therefore 5 questions for the inquest to answer: who died, where and when the person died, and how and in what circumstances the person died. A secondary and important purpose of an inquest is to consider whether it is necessary or desirable to make recommendations in relation to any matter connected with the death. The power is not limited to matters that are directly related to the manner and cause of death. Your Honour can consider more broadly whether any lessons can be learned from this death and whether anything should or could be done differently in the future to prevent a death in similar circumstances. Once the Court has completed a consideration of Julie's cause and manner of death and the cause and origin of the Bills Crossing Crowdy Bay fire and other fires and related deaths across the state of New South Wales over the 2019-2020 bushfire season, the Court will review the evidence and issues raised in each matter and determine which issues will proceed to further consideration via a representative case study. The hearing into representative case studies will occur at the Coroners Court here in Lidcombe, commencing on the 5th of September 2022. I will now provide a brief background and then describe the events of 8 November 2019 in detail. Your Honour, Julie was 63 years old when she died at home on the 8th of November 2019 as the Bills Crossing Crowdy Bay fire reached her property. She left behind her one remaining sister, Daintree Gerard, her sister's husband Ian, and her long-term partner Anthony or Tony Sharp. She also left behind good friends, some of whom have prepared a statement in these proceedings. We take this opportunity to acknowledge the loss suffered by Daintree and Tony and Julie's other family members and friends and offer our deepest condolences. We also acknowledge the presence of Daintree, Tony and any other family members and friends of Julie who may be watching these proceedings this morning. Your Honour, Julie lived at Johns River on a property located at 232 Wharf Road, which was the residence of her late father, Brian. In around 2010, Julie moved from Lismore to reside at this property with her father to provide him with care and assistance until such time of his passing in 2012. After this, Julie continued to remain living at the property. The property was around 120 acres in size, with roughly half of the property consisting of the homestead, which had originally been built by Brian Fletcher, as well as grazing paddocks and the remaining other half consisting of forest. The property adjoined the Crowdy Bay National Park to the east and south of the property. Your Honour will see shortly a Google Earth map, which is annexed to the statement of the former officer in charge of this investigation, Detective Sergeant David Frith. In the image before Your Honour now, Your Honour will note the winding road being Wharf Road, which tails off from the left-hand corner of the map and leads to Julie's property with the homestead identified by the red arrow at the centre of the map. And the property, which sits west of Julie's residence, and in the section above Wharf Road is 229 Wharf Road, occupied by Mr and Mrs Windress, and the property directly below is 230 Wharf Road, occupied by the Souter family. In relation to the property owned by Mr and Mrs Windress, Your Honour will see shortly some evidence of a video that Ms Windress took on the 8th of November 2019. Your Honour will now see a photograph by Tony of the front of Julie's residence. Julie had two very beloved pet cats named Bonnie and Clyde, respectively, and livestock on her property, including a horse named Nick, chickens, and several cattle. Daintree states that she and her sister shared a close relationship and saw each other regularly, given that she lived further up from Julie along the same road. According to Daintree, Julie enjoyed working on her farm, spending time with her good friends, and travelling. Daintree will provide a statement at the close of this inquest. Tony states that he had been Julie's long-term partner for around 20 years and would split his time between residing with Julie at her residence and travelling to Lismore as required due to personal commitments. According to Tony, Julie cared about her animals as much as she did people. Cheryl Wright and Robin McGrath, long-standing friends of Julie since primary school, state that together with Julie and other friends, they would stage a getaway to Port Macquarie each year, a tradition which they had engaged in for some 40 years. Julie was employed by TAFE New South Wales as a customer care assistant and worked at the Port Macquarie campus for some 4 years. Colleague Bernadette Warner describes Julie as having been a positive, kind, caring and easygoing person who was extremely good at her job, a stickler for processes and details, who loved her family and her animals, and a trip away to see a band or to attend a music festival. Jodie Brayley, another colleague of Julie, states that Julie was a fabulous person, full of love and care, and as having the best sense of humour. In the years prior to 2019, Julie suffered from some serious health issues, but had overcome those challenges and was living a healthy, meaningful life. I turn now, Your Honour, to the events leading up to the fire at Julie's property on the 8th of November. The Bills Crossing Crowdy Bay fire had been burning since 26 October 2019 and is believed to have commenced in the Cat-Eye wetlands east of the Crowdy Bay National Park, at approximately 12 kilometres south of Julie's home. Daintree states that both she and Julie had been concerned and conscious of the risk the fire posed to their properties on account of their properties adjoining the Crowdy Bay National Park. Cheryl states that in early November 2019, she and Julie were involved in planning their annual getaway to Port Macquarie with a group of friends, including Robin. It is important to acknowledge the evidence of Tony, who said in his statement in the days prior to 8 November, he had discussed a bushfire plan with Julie. He states that he and Julie agreed that the plan was to open the gates to let the animals out and then get out of the house early. Tony says he reiterated this constantly with Julie to ensure she would follow the plan, as she had a tendency to dilly-dally. The same sentiment was conveyed by Robin, who told investigating police, "Julie has always been a bit of a procrastinator. She usually turns up late to things and was always thinking she had more time than she did." On Thursday, 7 November 2019, a total fire ban order was declared with respect to the Mid-Coast local government area, which includes Johns River. Observations from the closest automatic weather station at Taree Airport, some 30 kilometres south of Johns River, recorded a maximum temperature of 35.5 degrees Celsius at 4:30 p.m. That day, the Bills Crossing Crowdy Bay fire took a significant run, spreading from a location of some 2 kilometres north of Harrington towards Coralville Road, Coroville, some 7 to 8 kilometres, and around a 20 minutes drive southeast from Julie's residence. The following day, Friday 8 November 2019, a total fire ban order had again been declared with respect to the Mid-Coast local government area, and the fire was initially mapped as spreading slowly north. Observations from the automatic weather station at Taree Airport recorded a maximum temperature of 33.4 degrees Celsius at 2:30 p.m. Daintree states she and Julie discussed that they were at increased risk of the fire that day if the wind changed direction. Around lunchtime, Julie left work early to pack some of her belongings due to increasing concerns that the bushfire was approaching her home. The evidence will demonstrate thereafter that Julie spoke with a number of friends and neighbours throughout the day, including Bernadette Warner, Cheryl Wright, Dinny Khan, Robin McGrath and Jodie Bradley, who variously contacted Julie via text messages or phone calls to check if she was okay and discussed her plans to leave if the fire approached. By mid-afternoon, the fire commenced a significant, rapid spread to the northeast towards Diamond Head, which is situated just to the north and east of Johns River. It is appropriate to pause here to note that the fire took an extreme and abnormal run between 1:32 p.m. and 6:59 p.m. that day. The fire was mapped as spreading a staggering 7 kilometres in approximately 3 hours. The fire then spread 2 to 3 kilometres to the northwest into the evening and the early morning of 9 November 2019. This extreme and dangerous fire behaviour goes some way to explaining how the fire took Julie and the residents of Johns River by surprise later that evening. Dinny Khan, a friend of Julie's and a resident of Johns River, took several photographs of columns of smoke emanating from the fire during the day on the 8th of November 2019. Anne Windrus also took several photographs of the fire at around 4 p.m. At around 5:30 p.m, Daintree went to Julie's property to help her move livestock and prepare her to leave. Daintree encouraged Julie to put her 2 cats into a cage so she was ready to leave if needed. Daintree stayed for a short time before returning to her house. This is the last time Julie was seen alive. At around 7:40 p.m, Tony states he spoke with Julie over the phone. Tony says he told Julie she needed to stay safe and leave early. At this stage, Tony said he did not get the impression that the fire was threatening the house. Following this phone call, Julie texted Tony a photo of their ginger cat sitting in an armchair. Robin McGrath says at 8:22 p.m, she received a phone call from Julie, who told her she had packed the car but didn't have her cats yet and was going to wet some towels down. Robin and her husband told Julie that she had to leave. She was not fire ready and the animals wouldn't save her. Robin told Julie that whatever she owned had to stay and she had to go. Robin recalled that Julie sounded a bit panicky but agreed with her. Robin did not get any indication that Julie wasn't going to follow her advice at that time. At about 8:30 p.m, Anne Windrus took a further 2 photographs of the fire. At around 9 p.m, Daintree had a conversation with Chris Bourne, a friend in the Johns River, New South Wales Rural Fire Service. Chris was in Sydney at the time and had rung to check they were okay and told them to be ready to leave. Following this, Daintree phoned Julie and suggested she finish packing and sorting the animals and then come to her place so they could make a decision on leaving together. Daintree told Julie she wouldn't be able to defend her property if the fire came. At 9:42 p.m, Julie texted Tony a photo of the fire in the distance. Your Honour, I now pause to advise that the court will shortly hear about the final telephone calls involving Julie and to allow any party or person watching these proceedings sufficient warning should they not wish to hear this evidence. Daintree states that at around 10:50 p.m, the wind changed direction and she and her husband decided they needed to leave immediately. Daintree phoned Julie and said, "This is urgent. The wind has hit. You need to get out now." Julie told her that she wanted to have a shower and something to eat before she left. Daintree again urged her to leave. At about 11 p.m, Daintree phoned Julie and they spoke for about a minute and a half. Daintree states she asked Julie if she had gotten out, to which Julie replied, "I can't get out. The house is exploding around me." And the phone call dropped out. This was the last time they spoke. Fire and Rescue New South Wales records indicate they received a call from Daintree at 11:03 p.m. Daintree states she reported that her sister's house was on fire and her sister was trapped inside. After this, Daintree states that she and her husband attempted to drive to Julie's house and had driven some 50 metres down Julie's driveway, which is a few hundred metres long, when they were met with thick smoke and flames in the trees beside the track, forcing them to return to their residence. At about 11:04 p.m, Julie rang 000 and reported to the 000 operator that her house was just about alight and the whole place was going up, and stressed it was really urgent. When the call was transferred to Fire and Rescue New South Wales, Julie repeated that the whole place is alight all of a sudden. Julie informed the Fire and Rescue operator that she wanted to get her other cat before she left, but she didn't know where it went, and repeated the whole place is on fire. The Fire and Rescue operator informed her to look after herself before the animals and advised they would send a truck. She thanked them and hung up. This is the last contact that Julie had with anyone, and it is believed Julie's house was destroyed by the fire shortly after this phone call. Captain Michael Cleland of New South Wales Rural Fire Service Brigade states that on 8 November 2019, the Harrington Brigade received a page at 11:07 p.m. reporting a structure alight. After radioing through the firecom for further details, they were advised that there were multiple houses alight on Wharf Road, Johns River. He states that he arrived at Wharf Road, Johns River, with a crew of another 4 people in Appliance Harrington 1 at about 11:33 p.m, directly behind another RFS appliance, namely Cundall Moto 2. While Harrington 1 was travelling along Wharf Road, Captain Cleland overheard a radio message from Cundall Moto 2 indicating that there was an elderly woman trapped inside her residence at 232 Wharf Road, Johns River. Accordingly, both appliances headed directly to Julie's address, with Harrington 1 trailing behind Cundall Moto 2. Captain Cleland states that Cundall Moto 2 stopped suddenly when driving up Julie's driveway, requiring Harrington 1 to take evasive action to avoid a collision. Cundall Moto 2 advised Harrington 1 that a large tree had fallen in front of them and that they were pulling out as it was too dangerous to continue up the driveway. Visibility having been poor on account of the smoke and a firestorm going across the driveway. Harrington 1 reversed, allowing Cundall Moto 2 to attend to other emergencies, and 3 crew members, including Captain Cleland, attempted to make their way up the driveway through the firestorm with severe amber attack and with no visibility due to the intense smoke as well as the strong winds. Captain Cleland reports that he returned to the truck to obtain his portable radio and their thermal imaging camera, while the other 2 crew members continued up the driveway. On his return, Captain Cleland states that the crew members advised him that there was a 2-storey house completely burnt to the ground, and they had a walk around the remains of the house and had not been able to locate anyone. They also indicated that they had seen 2 cars still at the property with no one inside, nor anyone inside the shed nearby the house, which still had a light on. Captain Cleland states they returned to their appliance and remained awaiting the arrival of Fire and Rescue New South Wales and New South Wales Police. Anne Windress, a nearby neighbour, took a video of the fire during the evening of 8 November, which depicts ember attack and the ferocity of the wind driving the fire. I'll just have that shown now.
I'm just looking at your van.
Looks like it's looking for a bloody bag.
Your Honour, I now pause to advise that Your Honour will shortly be shown photographs taken of Julie's house following the fire, and again to allow any party or person watching these proceedings sufficient warning should they not wish to view the following photographs. That should be page 86 to 88. Later that day, the 9th of November 2019, police forensic crime scene officers, including Senior Constable Warwick Holborough, attached to the Taree crime scene section, attended the house and located bone fragments believed to be the remains of Julie. The remains were located on the western side of the house in a location proximate to Julie's bedroom. Julie's vehicle was still parked in the garage where it had been the day prior when Daintree visited. It took some time to confirm the remains were Julie. Eventually, this was confirmed via comparison of dental records. The autopsy report listed Julie's cause of death as effects of fire. Given that the scope of issues to be considered today is limited to the manner and cause of Julie Fletcher's death, the court will hear evidence from two witnesses, namely Senior Constable Warwick Holborough and Mr Michael Cleland, RFS, Brigade Captain. It is likely that the evidence will demonstrate that Julie stayed at her property until the fire reached her house, as she did not appreciate how quickly the fire would impact her property. It is likely that she realised that she could not defend her property, but did not want to leave her animals behind and made a late decision to evacuate. The evidence will likely show that the fire approached Julie's property with such speed and ferocity that she was unable to evacuate in time. Your Honour, could I tender the brief of evidence relating to the inquest into the death of Julie Fletcher, which I understand report be marked Exhibit 48.
Yes, it will be Exhibit 48. Thank you, Mr Castleton.
And Your Honour, there's just one matter of correction. At page 70 of the brief, there's a statement of Detective Chief Inspector Rod Blackman. Paragraph 2 currently reads 11 November 2021. That should in fact read 11 November 2019.
Yes, thank you.
If it's convenient, Your Honour, I propose now to call Senior Constable Warwick Holborough.
Senior Constable Holborough, can you see and hear us in the courtroom? Senior Constable Holborough, can you see and hear us in the courtroom?
Yes, I can.
Right, you'll just hear from the court officer now. Thank you.
Silence, please. Do you swear by Almighty God that the evidence you shall give will be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth? If so, please say, I do.
I do.
Thank you.
Senior Constable, would you please state your full name, rank and station, please?
Warwick Holborough, Senior Constable, and I'm attached to Forensic and Evidence Technical Services Command at Taree.
And at Taree, that forms part of the Taree crime scene section, does it not?
That's correct.
And have you provided a statement in relation to the death of Julie Fletcher dated the 24th of July 2020?
Yes.
And do you have a copy of your statement with you this morning, Senior Constable?
Yes.
Have you read it recently?
Yes.
Do any matters require any correction?
No.
Now, were you tasked to investigate a death that may have occurred 232 Wharf Road, Johns River?
Yes.
And could you just inform Her Honour, please, how you came about to being tasked with that investigation?
So I was the rostered forensic officer on that day, and I was actually at another fire scene at Darawank and got informed by Inspector Christine George that there was a person believed to be deceased at 232 Wharf Road, Johns River. So I had to attend that address.
And did you attend that address on Saturday, the 9th of November 2019, Senior Constable?
That's correct.
And did you take a number of photographs in relation to your inspection of 232 Wharf Road, Johns River?
Yes, I did.
Your Honour, I propose now to show those photographs, and can I just again indicate to those who are watching remotely that some of the photographs might be distressing. What I propose to do is just to go through them in order, Senior Constable, to have you identified that they are the photographs that you took, and we'll start with the photograph of page 83. Now, is that a view to the north from the concrete ramp of the house at 232 Wharf Road?
That's correct.
And when you attended on the 9th, that is the 9th of November, was it in the morning or midday or afternoon?
It was approximately about 1:30 in the afternoon that I arrived there.
And was there any smouldering remains of damaged property from your inspection at that time?
Yes, that the actual premises still had what we call hotspots, and we had the Rural Fire Brigade there on attendance to actually still put them out.
I'll go to the next photograph, which is photograph 2. Senior Constable, is that a view to the south from the concrete ramp of the house?
That's correct.
And if we then move to photograph 3, is that a view to the southeast from the concrete ramp of the house?
That's correct. Yes.
And then to photograph 4, is that a view to the east from the concrete ramp of the house?
Yes.
And then next, photograph 5, is that a view to the west from the concrete ramp of the house?
Correct.
And then next, photograph 6, is that a view of the house as you enter from Wharf Road?
That's correct.
And was it your understanding that this was a house that was elevated above the ground?
Yes, would appear so, yes.
And then turning, if I may, to photograph 7, Senior Constable, is that a photograph of metal structure from the concrete ramp of the house?
That's correct.
Now, did you undertake your examination of the scene with any other police officers?
Yes, I did.
And who was also present with you on that occasion in the afternoon of the 9th of November 2019?
Was Constable Scott Olling and Scene of Crime Officer Grant Irwin.
And how would you, I mean, we've seen some of the photographs, how would you describe the general scene from your own observations?
Pretty intense fire from just the damage that was evident, and was not sort of in a one controlled burn. It sort of was spot fires here, there and everywhere.
Were there any structures that remained standing, or had all structures been just severely damaged from your observations?
Majority of them were damaged completely or destroyed, and there was only sort of 1 or 2 bits of shedding left on the property.
Are you able to express an opinion, Senior Constable, based on your experience as a forensic investigator, how long it might take a house of that size and structure to be destroyed in the manner we've just seen in the photographs?
Probably an hour to an hour and a half.
And as part of your examination, did you walk through the remains of the house?
Yes, we did.
And did you discover some human remains?
Yes, I did.
And where were those remains located, to your understanding?
To the western side, approximately 5 metres to the north of the ramp, of the concrete ramp.
And did you, as part of your investigation, obtain a floor plan of Ms. Fletcher's house?
I did speak to Sergeant Frith at the time, not long afterwards, and he actually showed me the floor plan of the house, yes.
And for her honour's benefit, Sergeant Frith was the officer in charge of this particular investigation?
Yes.
And having viewed that floor plan that Sergeant Frith provided to you, where were the human remains that you discovered located by reference to that floor plan?
Of Miss Julie Fletcher's bedroom.
And to your knowledge, were the remains sent off for forensic analysis?
Yes, they were.
And did you come to learn that by reference to dental records that the remains were identified as those of Julie Fletcher?
That's correct.
Your Honour, that concludes my questions.
Thank you. Senior Constable, you wouldn't mind just waiting so I can see if there's any other questions for you. Mr. Newton, do you have any questions?
I have no questions, Your Honour.
Thanks very much, Senior Constable. You're excused.
Thank you.
Your Honour, the next witness is Michael Cleland. If Mr Cleland could be brought into the virtual courtroom, please.
Good morning, Mr Cleland. Can you see and hear us in the courtroom?
Yes, I can. Good morning.
Good morning. You'll just hear from the court officer now.
Silence, please. Do you solemnly and sincerely declare and affirm that the evidence you shall give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? If so, please say, I do.
I do.
Thank you.
Sir, would you please state your full name?
Michael Cleland.
And could I just also have your present occupation, please?
Yes, I'm a senior technician for a soil and aggregate concrete testing company.
And were you in November of 2019 a member of the New South Wales Rural Fire Service?
Yes, I was.
And did you fulfil that role in a voluntary capacity?
Yes, and I still do to this day.
Do you have a statement that you signed on the 17th of April 2020 with you this morning?
Yes, I do.
And have you read that statement recently?
Yes.
Are there any matters that require any correction?
No, there's no matters that require any attention.
Were you a member of the Harrington Rural Fire Service Brigade as at 9 November 2019?
Yes, I was.
And Mr Cleland, how long had you been a member of that particular brigade at that time?
I'd been a member of Harrington Brigade since 2009.
And prior to that, had you been a member of any other New South Wales Rural Fire Service Brigade?
Yes, I joined the service in 1997 and I was a member of Plumpton Brigade in Sydney.
And are you still today a member of the Harrington Rural Fire Service Brigade?
Yes, I'm currently the captain.
Now, have you lived in and around Harrington and Plumpton for some significant time prior to November 2019?
I moved to Harrington in 2009 after leaving Sydney, so I've been around Harrington since 2009.
And as at November of 2019, did you have any familiarity with Wharf Road and the Johns River area?
I had familiarity with Johns River, but not Wharf Road directly.
On the evening of the 8th of November 2019, doing the best you can, was that the first occasion you had driven down Wharf Road, Johns River?
Yes, it was.
Can I just have you explain, if you could, the hours leading up to when you attended 232 Wharf Road? How was the fire evolving throughout the course of the 8th of November from your recollection?
Throughout the day, the fire was obviously taking runs through Craddy Bay National Park into Johns River State Forest area, moving various directions due to wind, and obviously just with the weather conditions, there was just increasing intensity.
Did it, from your recollection, start to run early in the morning of the 8th of November, or did it slowly build up throughout the course of the day as the wind picked up?
It had been running for multiple days with the wind picking up and weather conditions. So on that day, I can't specify if it was running early, if it was running late, but it had been running for a consecutive period of days.
I'll just have now, if I can, some line scans and maps that are found for the benefit of my learned friends at 180 to 183. Whilst they're coming up, Mr Cleland, do you remember what the wind direction was? Was it in a sort of generally heading northerly or northeasterly or norwesterly direction?
On the time that we went into the property, the wind was swirling. Predominantly, it was coming from the right to left, but it was just erratic winds and it was just swirling everywhere.
I'll just see if I can have that magnified just to assist you, but that's a fire progression map that shows Ms Fletcher's property. You'll see marked in towards the left near the Johns River.
Yep, I can see that.
And then we'll just go to the next one. So this is a fire progression map, Mr Cleland, taken on the 8th in the early part of the day. And then you see it much later on the 8th, the progression of that fire, which has gone through that area around Wharf Road, Johns River. I'll just, Your Honour, have brought up 2 line scans which show the spread of the fire on the 8th. Now, just to assist Mr Cleland, is Harrington in the bottom part of that line scan, which one may not be able to see?
Oh, I can't exactly see it at the moment.
Okay, and then one sees again Julie Fletcher's residence marked towards the top left-hand corner. And then if we go to the next line scan, which is much later on the 8th, Your Honour sees how quickly it's moved through that area on that day. Now, you've described that the wind was swirling. What I might do now, Mr Cleland, is just show you a short video which was, and before I show the video, I'll show you a map that was taken by a nearby neighbour, Anne Windress, who resides at 229 Wharf Road, Johns River. And I'll just have an aerial image brought up just to show you where her residence is relevant to Julie Fletcher's. Now, if you have any problems seeing it, please let her know.
I can see the residents in the arrows pointing to the left, to the right type thing of the dwelling.
Yeah, so the red arrow is Julie Fletcher's residence. In the top left-hand corner, you'll see some buildings.
Yep.
That's, as I understand it, 229 Wharf Road, which is the Windress property. And the video that I'm just about to show you now was taken from that property. If that could be played, please.
I'm just looking at your van.
That's like looking for a bloody bag. Mr Cleland, that last part, does that describe the sort of conditions you were faced with when you arrived at Wharf Road? That's the sort of wind.
It gives an indication of what some of the conditions were like with the wind, especially when you see that palm tree blowing sort of half over on itself. You could see the conditions was extreme wind, and the amber attack was just going everywhere, and the winds were swirling.
And
do you recall about what time you arrived at Johns River, that is 232 Wharf Road?
Around 23:30.
And how did you come to be there?
We were activated at 23:07 by page, gave us 10 to 15 minutes average turnout. Then Harrington 1 responded from Harrington via road to the area.
And you've said in your statement that there was another appliance there, Kundal Moto 2. Were they in front of your appliance when you arrived?
Yes, they were.
And did they have to stop suddenly from your observations because of a fallen tree?
Because the tree fell over in front of them. And at the time, they'd also had their headlights turned off due to the smoke visibility. So the tree fell down in front of them and Kundal Moto stopped suddenly to avoid hitting the tree. And it was too dangerous for them to attempt to go over the tree because of the size of it.
You mentioned a moment ago that they had their lights off because of the smoke. Do you understand why it was that they had their lights off because of the smoke?
Yes, they turned their headlights off because due to the intensity of the smoke and with the headlights into the smoke, it was bouncing back to the vehicle, which was impacting and impeding on their vision. So they turned their headlights off so they could get better vision of where they were travelling up the driveway.
And from your observations, Mr. Cleland, what type of appliance was Kundal Moto 2?
Coronial Moto 2 is a Category 2 tanker, which is a slightly smaller version than Harrington 1.
And you said in your evidence a moment ago that it was too dangerous for Kundal Moto 2 to drive over the fallen tree. Was a decision made within your appliance, Harrington 1, to, in effect, go on foot to the Fletcher residence?
Yes, it was. We received a radio message from Coronial Moto 2 OIC, excuse me, informing us that it was too dangerous. The tree was impacting their route to the property. Harrington 1 gave them room by turning to a clearing area. And at this time, 2 members from Harrington Brigade and myself said we're going to go in on foot. 2 members donned breathing apparatus and myself, not wearing breathing apparatus, continued on foot.
Could you identify who the members of that search team were?
Yeah, the members were Senior Deputy of Harrington, Robert McPherson, and Deputy Captain Garth Honeysett.
And of that group, how many had breathing apparatus?
2 members had them. Robert McPherson and Garth Honeysett were both wearing breathing apparatus, and myself not wearing any.
And was the reason that those 2 gentlemen were wearing breathing apparatus was because of the thick smoke that you've described earlier in your evidence?
Yes, the breathing apparatus is a respiratory protection which allows qualified members to gain entry to smoke-filled environments, and obviously they had a little bit more protection to get through the thick smoke.
And at this time, the wind was swirling and gusting, I take it?
Yes, the wind was swirling, gusting. As I said, predominantly it was coming right to left as we were making our way up the driveway, but the wind gusts were just swirling all around us.
And at this time, did it continue to rain embers down upon you?
Yes, we're getting amber attack continually while we're up the driveway. The wind, flames, and the smoke was all around us as we were running up the driveway.
Did you, at that time, have any sense where the fire edge was or not?
No, we couldn't decide where the edge was. We were surrounded by fire, surrounded by amber attack, and obviously the thick smoke from all fires and that.
Now, the search team, including yourself, headed down, as I understand your evidence in your statement, down Wharf Road. Did the team get to Julie Fletcher's residence or not?
Yes, my 2 members wearing breathing apparatus got to the residence from a driveway. Myself, I had to turn back and get some things off the truck. I realised halfway up the driveway I had to get my portable radios and a thermal imaging camera. So I made my way back to the truck while the members continued to the residence.
And to your understanding, did those two brigade members undertake a search around the residence of Julie Fletcher?
Yes, when I linked back up with them after gaining the equipment, as previously stated, excuse me, I met up with them halfway up the driveway on their return. They informed me that there was a two-storey house completely burnt to the ground. They informed me that there was two or three cars that they searched. They looked in the windows, made sure there was no signs of life in them cars. They found that there was a shed still standing, which had a light on it, and they informed me that their two-storey house is completely burnt to the ground.
Did you yourself, Mr. Cleland, cite the house or not?
No, I didn't. I linked back up with the crew as they were making their way back out the driveway.
And once you were apprised of that information from your two colleagues, did you radio that into FireCom?
Yes, I radioed out through the FireCom informing of the conditions that they see.
And doing the best you can today, how long do you think you were there from when Kundal Moto 2 turned around and a decision was made to proceed on foot to the house?
No, it was instantly we made the decision to go to the house when Kundal Moto 2 retreated. Time frame on how long we'll be, I cannot tell you that.
Thank you, Mr. Cleland, for that evidence.
Mr. Cleland, if you wouldn't mind just waiting so I can see if there's any other questions for you. Mr. Newton?
Your Honour, I have no questions.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Mr. Cleland. You're free to go.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Your Honour, that concludes the evidence. Daintree Gerard, Julie's sister, would like to make a family statement. Could I invite Daintree to make that now?
Daintree, if you're ready to do that now, please go ahead whenever you're ready. Take as much time as you like, take as many breaks as you need.
Thank you. My sister Julie was caring, compassionate, considerate, and capable. Julie had sensitivity, vulnerability, and strength. Today, Julie loved her nieces and nephews, Tess and Fletcher, Justin, Olivia, and Julia. She embraced their wives and husbands and their children, Adam, Rose, Samuel, Errol, Oscar, Willow, and Damon. Which were central to Julie's life. Her many girlfriends and their families, her friends, neighbours, and work colleagues. She was a great asset to her employers from the early days at Braithwaite's Dentist in Taree to the Commonwealth Bank in Taree and Lismore to New South Wales and recently.
You're right. Unfortunately, we're having some technical difficulties.
Daintree, I'm so sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, can you hear me or not?
You're breaking up a little bit and we don't want to miss a single word. And so I'm just wondering if we stop for a moment, what we're going to do is I'm just going to stop for a moment and then we're going to arrange for you to contact us by telephone, just so we don't miss anything.
Okay.
So we'll just stop
All
for
right.
a moment.
So you'll
and
ring
then-
me?
Yes, we'll ring you.
Yep. Okay.
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 Just adjourn for a couple of minutes.
Damn it. My connection.
Daintree, I understand, is on the line.
Oh, great. Daintree, if you wouldn't mind just picking up where you left off. Now we can hear, we'll be able to hear you very well.
Your Honour, I think if it's subject, of course, to Your Honour's view, it might be preferable if Daintree could start from the beginning,
I think that's a good idea.
because I think there was a few chunks that were completely missing, unfortunately.
Yes, that would be great if you wouldn't mind. Thanks, Daintree.
That's okay. And I'm sorry, I'm on a satellite connection here and sometimes it's not as good as others.
Oh,
Okay.
that's okay. We're very used to this sort of thing at the moment.
Yeah. All right.
Thanks, Daintree.
My sister Julie was compassionate, caring, considerate and capable. Julie had sensitivity, vulnerability and strength. Today, on Julie's behalf, I want to acknowledge the role that all Julie's extended family and friends have played in her life, and especially the support given to Ian and I and our family on her loss. Julie loved her nieces and nephews, Tess and Fletcher, Justin, Olivia and Julia. She embraced their wives and husbands and their children, Adam, Rose, Samuel, Errol, Oscar, Willow and Damon. I also acknowledge the deep friendships which were central to Julie's life, her many girlfriends and their families, her friends, neighbours and work colleagues. She was a great asset to her employers from early days at Braithwaite's Dentist in Taree to the Commonwealth Bank in Taree and then Lismore, to New South Wales Maritime and to most recently TAFE in Port Macquarie. Whilst living in Lismore, she attained a bachelor's degree in legal and justice studies. Julie persisted through many a workplace restructure and loved to support her workmates and clients. TAFE New South Wales extended their condolences with this comment: Julie was not only a team member, she was a friend, a colleague and a mentor to so many members. Her presence, insight and wisdom will be missed. Julie was the middle sister of three. Robin, our eldest, sadly passed away in May 2019. I have very deep memories from when memories start as a child, and Robin and Julie were always there through life's journey. Our family connection to this area is strong and long-lasting, with grandparents settling at Passion Fruit Creek, just north of Johns River, and running a small dairy. We grew up on that same dairy farm and attended school at Cundleton and Tahari Catholic School. As children, our chore on the Passion Fruit Creek farm was often bringing in the cows, and this actually included rowing across the river to the property we called the Marshes, now the north side of Wharf Road, rounding up the stragglers, supporting calves in their first swim back across the river, and walking them home to the dairy some considerable distance, 1 to 2 kilometres. Mum would often say, no doubt we had the cleanest cows around. Brian and Ashley, our parents, sent Julie and I on a great adventure when the dairy farm was sold. Julie was 16 and I was 13. And we went on a rural youth bus tour full of strangers to us. We went through the Red Centre. And we climbed to Uluru, cruised Catherine Gorge, slept under the stars at Devil's Marble. Julie was even, this was funny, proposed to by a Yugoslavian opal miner at Coop Petey. This may well have been the start of Julie's love of travel and exploring. From bushwalking in Tasmania to backpacking through Europe and travelling the Greek islands and New York with friends. We often joked with Dad that Wharf Road was the centre of the universe. Wharf Road was formed by Brian on his Fiat 600 in post-dairying days during the late 70s and early 80s. Lots were subdivided and homes were built, and lives lived amongst a peaceful landscape. Julie, Dad and I had a strong sense of place with the farm, which had been in the family since the 1970s, and we nurtured it with a focus on preserving and reconstructing habitats for wildlife. Ospreys nest there. Wildlife abound. Koalas have frequented the house garden as they range the locality foraging on swamp mahogany, tallowood and forest red gums. Our father Brian built an expansive home on this property in the later years of his life, upcycling many timbers from the original cottage built in the early 1900s. The farm was Julie's peaceful space. Family and friends, past and present, enjoyed this tranquil tidal reach of the Stewart's River, the finger of agricultural land, bounded by river, by lake, and national park estate. Julie was challenged by a series of health issues, which she confronted bravely and persisted through. Julie loved all creatures, great and small. In spite of the devastating drought conditions in 2018-19, Julie managed to have the fattest cattle around. Her cattle, all named of course, Gary the bull, Nick the retired trotter, and Mr. Big the adopted vagrant, mischievous miniature horse, were an important part of her life. They were pets and given a very, very happy life. For those of you who knew Julie well, or for those who knew Julie well, she felt people's pain and misfortune deeply. She empathised and supported people with many kind acts. In many a conversation, she would fill me in on people's illnesses, deaths, accidents, misfortunes, and remark, "Oh my God, this is a disaster." But my words to Julie now are, "This is a disaster. You left us too abruptly. You were not ready. Your family and friends will miss you greatly." Julie's death was a traumatic event. She lost her life to what was an apocalyptic combination of fire and wind. We would like to express our sincere gratitude to the New South Wales Rural Fire Service and importantly the volunteer firefighters who assisted us in the Johns River area and acknowledge the invaluable work they've done over the harrowing period. The brigade, to my knowledge, that attended Wharf Road on that fateful Friday night and the Saturday where they protected our home and the aftermath Sunday village of Johns River. The crews that attended Wharf Road were Harrington, Wootton, Cundlemoto, Johns River, Hennenvale, Camden Haven, Sandcroft and Stromstone. Julie loved her family, her friends, her animals, and being on the family farm with the comfort of family possessions and memories in all that surrounded her. Amongst the sadness, we celebrate Julie's life, a girl and a woman who touched so many lives. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Daintree. I'm so sorry that you've lost your beautiful sister. I really appreciate you giving us all the picture of who Julie was and what a life she lived. And she obviously touched so many people, and she will be missed very much by her family and friends. And our thoughts are with you all today. Thank you.
Your Honour, that concludes today's hearing into the inquest into the death of Julie Fletcher. Your Honour now has the benefit of the documentary material contained within Exhibit 48. Your Honour has heard the oral testimony from Senior Constable Warwick Holborough of Feds and RFS Captain Michael Cleland. Your Honour also has the benefit of hearing the family statement that was delivered just now by Daintree Durand. At a later stage in Your Honour's inquiry into the 2019-2020 bushfire season, those assisting Your Honour will formally address the court on the manner and cause of Julie's death. In that regard, I can foreshadow now that a formal submission is likely to be made that Julie Fletcher died around 11:05 p.m. on Friday, 8 November 2019, at her residence, 232 Wharf Road, Johns River, due to the effects of fire in connection with the Bills Crossing Crowley Bay fire. Would Your Honour formally stand this matter over to the 5th of September 2022?
Yes, I do that now.
Your Honour, I note the time. Would it be convenient to take the morning adjournment now? And after that adjournment, my learned friend, Ms Ward of Senior Counsel, will open the inquiry into the Falford Road Darawank fire.
Yes, thank you, Mr Castleton. We'll adjourn now and resume at 12 o'clock.
Silence, please. This coroner's court is temporarily
Yes, Ms Ward.
Your Honour, these are the coronial proceedings into the Failford Road Darawank fire. I appear with my learned friend Mr Castleton of Senior Counsel as counsel assisting Your Honour. There are a number of separate appearances that Your Honour will take on behalf of sufficient interest parties.
I'll just take those appearances now, thank you.
May it please the Court, Ransom, RANSOM, on behalf of IAG.
Thank you, Ms Ransom.
Your Honour, my name is Miss Wilkinson. I appear on behalf of Essential Energy.
Thank you, Ms Wilkinson.
And Your Honour, Newton, I appear on behalf of the Rural Fire Service, Fire and Rescue New South Wales, National Parks and Wildlife Service, and the Forestry Corporation of New South Wales.
Thank you, Mr Newton.
Your Honour, these are the opening submissions for the coronial inquiry into the cause and origin of the Failford Road Darawank fire. This hearing takes place within the context of very many other cause and origin inquiries that Your Honour has already conducted into a large number of fires across the 2019-2020 Black Summer bushfire season, with more inquiries still to conduct. A small number of the cause and origin inquiries will then be considered in further detail in later representative case study hearings. Matters will be selected for further investigation via a case study hearing by Your Honour on the basis that they, for instance, raise issues of general importance in relation to how the community and the resources of the state try to anticipate catastrophic fire events and limit their impact or otherwise respond to bushfire emergencies when they happen. The Darawank fire has already been identified as one fire that will proceed to a Stage 2 representative case study hearing. During that hearing, Your Honour will consider in further detail evidence going to the important issues of how Essential Energy classifies bushfire risk severity zones in those parts of the state serviced by their energy infrastructure. This in turn is important in understanding how Essential Energy's vegetation management program attempts to reduce the risk of vegetation impacting upon electrical assets in each of the bushfire risk severity zones across the state. The evidence within the brief squarely raises certain issues around this topic, but those questions will not be answered through the hearing this week, which is focused and limited to cause and origin of the fire. Essential Energy will be given a fair opportunity to respond to matters that I will shortly outline, arising from the expert evidence of Mr. Paul Demar. Introduction to the area affected by the Darawank fire. A map taken from Google will shortly come up on the screen to help Your Honour orientate to the scene of the fire. I'll start with the introduction even while we wait for that map, Your Honour. This fire started on Failford Road, which is an important road in the area because it links the Pacific Highway to the Lakes Way and therefore to the communities along the coast, including Blackhead, Hallidays Point, Failford, Darawank and Foster Tuncurry. It's also a road that thousands of holiday makers travel each year to reach those holiday spots. Many of us will have driven along the road without even knowing what it was called. The fire burnt in the Mid-Coast local government area, encompassed within the lands of the Warramai people. It burned for approximately 3 weeks and damaged an area of approximately 3,000 hectares, including around 1,200 hectares of the Darawank Nature Reserve. This makes this fire actually one of the smaller fires that Your Honour will consider in the course of the cause and origin hearings. It is, of course, of no comfort to the people affected by the Darawank fire to hear that it was one of the smaller fires across the 2019-2020 season. The observation that it was of relatively small reach doesn't diminish the experience of the people who were so quickly overrun by the fire that they couldn't evacuate or effectively prepare to fight it. So Your Honour will now see on the screen the Google map, the Pacific Highway running from Nabiac to the west and heading off the map to the northern reach past Rainbow Flat. Falford Road links the Pacific Highway through Falford to Darawank, and Your Honour will see the Lakes Way then coming down from the north of the map to the south and terminating on this footage at the Tuncurry Waste Management Centre. Of course, in real life, the Lakes Way extends past the management centre. Your Honour will also see 9 Mile Beach along the eastern edge of the Darawank region. At least 16 structures were destroyed or damaged by fire, including homes in Falford and Darawank and Halliday's Point and surrounds. Fortunately, no loss of human life ensued. The court will receive evidence within the brief suggesting that a combination of high temperatures and gusting winds on the background of drought quickly pushed this fire to the east of its starting point on Falford Road, and at times blew ash and embers kilometres ahead to create spot fires. Firefighting authorities had to chase the fire and anticipate where it might land next, while some communities had no time to do anything but hide. I'll attempt to give some details of what that experience was like for the people who lived through it, whilst also acknowledging that those of us who weren't there can never truly know. The Mary River Times interviewed select residents of the Greater Lakes community 1 year after the commencement of the Darawank fire, and I'm going to refer to some of those short interviews during this opening. This included an interviewer with the photographer, Mr. Martin von Stoll. Mr. von Stoll took a memorable photo of the Darawank fire from the beach at Blackhead near Foster at around 5 p.m. on the day the fire commenced. That photograph is now displayed on the screen, and Your Honour will see that it is included as the cover photo on the RFS Fire Bulletin for issue number 1 in 2020. So it's a photo that's actually been included in very many of the briefs that have been before Your Honour, but Your Honour now understands who took the photo and where from. The following accounts were provided by community members to the Manning River Times and included in a short audio-visual presentation published by that newspaper. This includes an account from Tuncurry Rural Fire Service crew member Dan Wallace, who recalls that on the day the fire started, he and another 2 crew members, David Moore and Curtis Dunk, were working on the Minimbar fire when Dan saw a huge plume of smoke racing towards Tuncurry. He says they got permission from the Minimbar crew leader to leave the fire at Minimbar and race towards what is now known to be the Darawank fire. They were immediately thrown into attempts to save properties around Tuncurry. This wasn't isolated rural properties at risk or rugged and inaccessible national park. This fire was threatening coastal towns and built-up populated environments. Ms. Jane Ticehurst, the manager of Discovery Parks in Foster, says the fire advanced so rapidly that residents were unable to evacuate from the area and were forced to take shelter in emergency evacuation shelters. And Mr. Jeff Roddick, the owner of Lumpy's Nursery, describes blood red sun and sky for hours after the fire started. Tuncurry RFS Captain Stephen Sergi describes the horrific Darawank fire as having caught residents and firefighters off guard, with no one expecting the fire to have spread as quickly as it did. In his interview with Manning River Times, Mr. Wallace goes on to say that a year on from the fire, about 30 new members had joined Tuncurry RFS. This must say something about local people determining to stay in the area and to do their bit to protect their community in the face of the fires that are to come. A fire starts. On Saturday, 26 October 2019, a total fire ban was in force around the Mid-Coast local government area, including Falford. Indeed, similar orders were in force across much of the state. Observations from the closest automatic weather station at Taree Airport recorded the temperature at 11:30 a.m, about 10 minutes before the fire commenced, was 35.1 degrees. Relative humidity was 14%, wind speed at 35 kilometres per hour, wind direction 320 degrees, that is blowing from the northwest, and wind gusts of 46 kilometres an hour. Records from Essential Energy reveal that 11:41 a.m, the feeder protection from Halliday's Point CB-3B2 feeder was operated after a trip occurred. In lay terms, what mattered was that something caused the power to go out. Around 34 calls were received notifying the company of a power outage. Witnesses shortly after reported seeing two small fires at different spots along Falford Road. Because that road links the coast to the highway, it's no surprise that there were a number of cars driving by on Saturday morning. 000 records indicate that the first caller to report the fire was Mr. James Murphy, who saw the fire as he was driving to work. Fortuitously, Mr. Murphy is with Fire and Rescue New South Wales, and at the time was an acting inspector. So one of the very first witnesses to the fire was vastly experienced in leading a response to fires and was able to immediately take charge. When he turned onto Falford Road from the Lakes Way, Mr. Murphy immediately saw a small fire, described as being only a few metres by a few metres. This was at the base of a power pole on the south side of Falford Road, opposite the driveway of a private property. Mr. Murphy saw sparks dropping from large insulators on the power pole that appeared to have ignited the grass beneath. He didn't see a tree branch fall onto the electrical conductors and doesn't recall seeing a fallen tree branch at the scene. I pause here to note that the fire detected by Mr. Murphy is not the subject of this inquiry and has not been separately reported to Your Honour. Your Honour only learnt of the existence of this fire late in the investigation into the Darawank fire, so I will refer to it as the unreported fire. Mr. Murphy pulled over at the scene of the unreported fire, put on his fire and rescue uniform and spoke with the resident of the nearby property. That resident reported hearing a loud bang and then that the power had gone off. At around this point, a passing motorist also stopped and informed Mr. Murphy that there was another fire, 300 metres along Falford Road as one headed towards Nabiac. So that is, as one headed west towards the highway. It was this fire that later became known as the Falford Road Darawank fire. At 11:42 a.m, Mr Murphy contacted 000, called in the fire at his location, and also informed the operator of the existence of another fire reported as being 300 metres from the intersection of the Lakes Way and Falford Road. As first on scene with highest rank, Mr Murphy assumed responsibility as incident controller. When the 000 operator said that he would dispatch an RFS unit, Mr Murphy was able to immediately say he thought the fire would need more than RFS units. Mr Murphy next walked up and in a westerly direction along Falford Road in the direction of Nabiac to confirm the existence of the earlier fire reported by the passerby. He observed fire on the south side of the road, approximately 20 by 10 metres, burning in a southeasterly direction. At some point, Mr Murphy also called the RFS Diamond Beach Brigade, where he is deputy captain, and requested crews. At 11:49 a.m, he again rang comms and told them the fire was now about 300 metres and he was worried it would shortly cross the Lakes Way and residences would be in danger. He thought the fire would soon be a Class 2 fire, meaning it was escalating and would require a multi-agency response. So I emphasise in the opening, Your Honour, unlike many other matters that the court has investigated, this fire was observed in its infancy and immediately reported to authorities. Another early witness was Mr Jordan Kite. At around 11:45 a.m, he was driving east along Falford Road towards the Lakes Way intersection on his way home from work. He'd driven approximately 400 metres past the Falford Road, Drutt Road intersection when a large branch from a roadside tree fell down. The tree was behind a fence on the other side of the road, but when it fell, it landed partly onto power lines below. Mr Kite says the front part of the branch reached down onto the stretch of road directly in front of his car, and he ended up driving over it. Mr Kite immediately pulled over and got out of the car. He said the power lines did not break apart under the weight of the branch. Rather, they were sagging towards the ground but were not touching the ground. The bottom part of the tree branch was, however, lying suspended half in the air over the sagging power lines and the other half lying across the road. Over the next minute or so, from a position of about 10 metres away, Mr Kite heard crackling and saw sparks from the point of contact of the branch against the conductors. The sparks fell directly into the dry grass below and a fire started. Initially, the fire took off towards the road, but then turned south back towards the bush and away from the road. Mr Kite recalls the weather conditions being very windy at the time. 000 records indicate that Fire and Rescue New South Wales received a call from Mr Kite at 11:45 a.m. Mr Kite says that he left the scene some 15 to 20 minutes later, but not before he spoke to some other passers-by who pulled over at the scene. Mr Kite recalls one passerby throwing water onto the fire from a bottle he was carrying, prompting Mr Kite to call out that he should stay away because of the fallen power lines at the scene. Mr Kite also recalls speaking to an RFS crew member who had come from Nabiac and warned that there might not be much they could do at the scene until they knew the power had been switched off. At around 11:49 a.m, essential energy crews were mobilised after reports were received by their contact centre of a conductor down and a grass fire having started. Essential energy field staff later attended the scene and removed the tree limb from the conductors. Following an asset inspection, the conductors were put back into service with no repairs required. Shortly after noon, Detective Senior Constable Peter Shedden arrived at the scene of the fire and saw a branch lying across power lines on the ground on the southern side of Falford Road. By this time, the fire was progressing east towards the Lakes Way. DSC Shedden reports there were strong westerly winds blowing the fire, and he then moved off towards the Lakes Way to warn and assist people in its path. The court will now see the first aerial photograph taken of the fire by Air Attack Supervisor Blackmore at 1:11 p.m. This is an image taken from the brief at page 875. The fire can be seen to be tracking in an easterly direction with plumes of smoke billowing to the west. Moving to fire progression. Soon after the fire commenced, it rapidly reached the intersection of Falford Road and the Lakes Way, then crossed the Lakes Way and continued to burn to the east. It was burning through bush, but towards homes and populated areas along the coast. Roads were closed and people were urgently evacuated from areas including Falford, Darawank, Hallidays Point and Tuncurry. The fire consumed parts of the Darawank Nature Reserve that runs along Tuncurry Beach. A wind change forced the fire in a southerly direction towards the Tuncurry Township, and soon after sharply changed direction again, spreading the fire along its flanks in a northerly direction. Unfortunately, this caused the fire to impact upon the villages of Hallidays Point and Blackhead. Overnight, the fire extended to Blackhead Road with a spot over north of Blackhead Road between Tallwoods Village and Diamond Beach Road. There was also a spot over north of Falford Road in the city of Bungwall, in the vicinity, not the city, but the vicinity of Bungwall Creek. Around this time, the fire was reported to be approximately 2,300 hectares in size. In this incident map for the fire, taken on Sunday, 27 October 2019 in the early hours, Your Honour can see a number of things. This is the map drawn from page 78 of the brief and is prepared some 16 hours after ignition. Firstly, at the centre left of the map, Your Honour can see the Falford Road and Drutt Road intersection. To the right of the intersection, the red circle cross marks the suspected area of origin. This is in line with eyewitness accounts indicating the origin of the fire east of the Falford Road and Drutt Road intersection. So that's the red marker towards the centre of the fire, the centre of the map. There are then red symbols on the map to the top right, which indicate the position of some of the spot fires that I've just described. To the northeast of the Falford Road Drutt intersection, there is spotting in the vicinity of Bungwall Creek, as well as spotting north over Blackhead Road. At the top of the map sits the Lakes Way Road, and if you follow this road down, it curves past Lorena Drive, intersects with Falford Road, and then traverses down to the foot of the map. The multi-directional movement of the fire on account of the blustering erratic winds into the morning of 27 October is evident in the reach of the fire from east of the Lakes Way Road, east of the Lakes Way, to just south of the Tuncurry Waste Transfer Station, and then north through the Darawank Nature Reserve that runs along the beach. Indeed, it extends further up to a point just north of Blackhead Road at Hallidays Point. Aircraft fitted with infrared line scan imagery captured the first line scan image at 3:34 a.m. This is displayed in court, overlapped on a map evidencing the trajectory of the fire as described in the incident map. In the next incident map for 2 November 2019, so some days into fire progression, the court will see that between 27 October and the 2nd of November 2019, the northern flank of the fire had passed Blackhead Road and was encroaching on Tallwoods Village. And the eastern flank of the fire had progressed in the area near Bungwall Creek. Then, fire progression mapping for 13 November through to 14 November 2019, so close to 2 weeks later, is then evident. This is a map taken from the brief at page 84. It can be seen that firefighting resources were also being stretched at this time south of this fire in order to attend to the Wallace Lake fire to the southwest, to the Hillview fire just north, and a further 3 fires, including Bill's Crossing Crowdy Bay fire further northeast, and the Rumba Complex and Thunderbolts Way Brett Eye fires to the northwest. At 11:06 on 13 November 2019, this fire was amalgamated with the Hillville fire by the New South Wales Rural Fire Service Incident Management Team. And from then on, the Falford Road fire was mapped and managed as part of the Hillview fire. The Hillview fire itself was recorded as being out on 26 December 2019 at 8:32 a.m. Evidence as to cause and origin. Given the scope of issues to be considered over the next 2 days is limited to the cause and origin of the Fairfield Road fire, the court will hear evidence from 3 witnesses only. These witnesses are firstly Mr. Paul Demar. He is a court-appointed expert, bushfire risk and vegetation management consultant who undertook a site inspection on the 1st of February of this year and has prepared a report into the health of the trees which fell onto the conductors, or the tree I should say, and whether it should have been detected and rectified as part of vegetation management plans applied by Essential Energy prior to 26 October 2019. Secondly, the court will hear from Mr. Glenn Hargrave. He is the Senior Program Supervisor in Vegetation Operations for the North East region at Essential Energy, and he undertook a site inspection on 28 October 2019. He can also explain how Essential Energy identified vegetation that needs to be cut back in an attempt to mitigate, but not eliminate, risk that vegetation will fail and cause a fire. Thirdly, the court will hear from Mr. Trevor Blackburn, court-appointed expert and consulting engineer, who has prepared a report on the papers into the electrical assets thought to be implicated as the cause of the Darawank fire. The subject tree. As already outlined, both eyewitness accounts in the immediate aftermath of the fire, along with Essential Energy records, point to this fire having commenced around 11:40 a.m. on Saturday, 26 October 2019, as a result of arcing. The evidence suggests at least 1, but possibly 2 branches fell from over the 3-phase, 3-wire, 11 kV conductors between power poles 12480 and 34830 along Falford Road. The suspected area of origin is adjacent to private property and located on the southern side of Falford Road, approximately 500 metres east of the Drutt Road intersection. Mr. Demar, the court-appointed expert, believes 2 branches fell away and onto the conductors below. Other witnesses refer to having seen only 1 branch. The brief of evidence, shortly to be tendered, contains several photographs depicting the suspected area of origin and the blackbutt or Eucalyptus pilaris tree from which the 2 branches on Mr. Demar's account are believed to have fallen. So this will be displayed in a photo that will now come up on screen. taken on 27 October 2019 and marked up by Mr DeMar in the course of his later report. The subject tree, that is the tree from which the branches fell triggering the fire, is believed to be situated some 7.8 metres south of the overhead conductors. What Your Honour might observe from this photo is as follows. The subject tree is within the boundary of private property. Your Honour will be able to see, if not the wire fencing, at least the fence posts that are visible at the bottom of the photo. Conductors are then visible towards the middle of the photo. Obviously, by the time of this photograph, the conductors had been put back into service by Essential Energy field staff because you can see them there in situ. The arrow to the left of the photo points to a fractured stub which Mr DeMar entitles Fractured Branch Stub 1, and the arrow to the right similarly points to another stub which Mr DeMar identifies as Fractured Branch Stub 2. The court will now see a photograph taken by Detective Senior Constable Shedden on 26 October 2019, so the day of the fire, sometime after midday. Mr DeMar has also marked up this photo in his report. I note, Your Honour, firstly, to the left of the two fallen branches, or what Mr DeMar identifies as two separate branches, Your Honour will see a power pole, which is power pole 34830. To the right, but not shown in the photograph, sits the second power pole, being pole with identification number 12480. Your Honour might be able to see that two of the three conductors appear to be sagging down towards the ground under the weight of the fallen branch or branches. Mr DeMar identifies a large branch, which he believes fractured from stub 1, as was displayed in the previous photograph, and a smaller branch, which he believes fractured from stub 2. The top of the large branch is suspended in the air and apparently entangled in two of the three conductors, whilst the bottom part of that branch reaches to the ground. Further, whilst the power pole is on the roadside of the wire fence, the larger fallen branch lies across the fence line, reaching back into the private property. Mr DeMar estimates one fracture point on the subject tree is some 11.5 metres above ground, and another fracture point on the tree is some 15 metres above ground, whilst the conductors stood at a height of about 7 metres above ground. I'll now take the court to an image from page 2-19 of the brief. As marked by Mr DeMar, but as originally captured in a Google Street View imagery recorded in May of 2018. Mr DeMar tells the court it is likely that a branch fractured under wind load imparted by the strong west-northwest winds prevailing at the time of the failure. Then, as the branch fell, it collided forcefully with another branch, forcing it to also fracture and fall. Mr DeMar surmises that both branches fell onto the conductors below, noting that each branch, in his view, would have extended out above the conductors by at least 6 metres, with their growth in that direction prompted by access to sunlight in the cleared road and the power line easement. The court will also hear from Professor Blackburn that the branch interaction with two of the phase conductors caused arcing that was moderated by wood bridges formed between the two live conductors. According to Professor Blackburn, the arcing caused embers to be emitted from the foliage, which fell to the ground and ignited dry grass on the ground below, starting the fire. Police investigation into cause and origin. Between 12:05 and 12:45 p.m. on Sunday, 27 October, the day after ignition, Senior Constable Hogg from New South Wales Police Forensic Evidence and Technical Services Command attended the location and took measurements of the distance from the subject branch, focusing on only one branch, to the poles on either side. He recorded that the subject branch landed some 36.7 metres north of pole 34830 and some 52 metres south of pole 12480. There was otherwise no detailed cause and origin investigation at the scene, although New South Wales Police compiled a report to the coroner and assisted in the early stages of compiling a brief of evidence for Your Honour's fire inquiry. I'll here pause to note, Your Honour, that you heard evidence this morning in relation to the inquest into the death of Julie Fletcher about the crime scene officer in that matter being called away from his investigation into the Darawank fire in order to conduct a crime scene investigation there. Essential energy involvement. So the following day, Monday, 28 October 2019, Mr Hargrave from Essential Energy attended the subject area to investigate the cause of the fire for Essential Energy. He was accompanied by Graham Ketteringham, now deceased, who was the Essential Energy Vegetation Program Compliance Auditor for the North Coast region. Mr Hargrave has provided two statements to assist the court's inquiry. Mr Hargrave's inspection took about an hour and a half. The subject area had not been cordoned off and there was no one guarding the scene. He formed the view that one branch had fallen and that it did not fall in the direction of the wind. He observed a branch on the ground with a natural fracture stub lying adjacent to the subject tree, and the stub appeared to match a torn branch stub on the tree. He surmised that the natural fracture had recently occurred and that the branch appeared to have arc points consistent with contact between conductors and branch. Mr Hargrave provides the following key measurements. The subject tree was 5 to 6 metres inside the fence line of the private property. The length of the branch was approximately 17 to 18 metres. However, the branch had been cut prior to their inspection. Given that the branch appeared to project above remaining foliage and its position within the tree, with, on his view, the nearest foliage being 5.5 metres to the side and 7.3 metres above the mains, he estimated that the branch was, at the time of failure, outside the minimum clearance distance. Mr Hargrave reviewed the health of the branch and observed that there were no visible external signs of borer or termite damage. During an internal inspection, he observed ribbing, which is typically indicative of termite damage. He did not observe any active termite activity, that is, live termites or fresh frass. Mr Hargrave determined that the subject tree was structurally sound and the remaining branches deemed to be outside the clearance zone. Further, because the tree and span were within the cycle period and a vegetation inspection was to be undertaken within the next 12 months, it was determined that no further remedial action was required. Mr Hargrave explains that Essential Energy classified the entirety of its network area on the basis of bushfire risk classification rankings from P1, high risk severity, through to P4, non-bushfire prone. The Darawank fire ignited in an area classified P2, moderate risk severity. This classification then informed Essential Energy's approach to vegetation management at the scene. For example, Essential Energy ran a pre-summer bushfire inspection program, which provided an additional layer of risk management in areas with a P1, high risk severity bushfire risk classification. Mr Hargrave describes this as a further check to identify and address defects, including vegetation defects, that may not have been detected by other routine inspections. Because the Darawank fire commenced in an area classified as P2, moderate risk severity, it did not receive a pre-summer bushfire inspection. Mr. Hargrave explains that separate to the pre-summer bushfire inspection, Essential Energy conducted other cyclical inspection programs for network assets. I'll firstly deal with the asset management system because it can be quickly summarised. Routine pole and asset inspection at the area where the Darawank fire would later ignite was most recently undertaken on 22 April 2016, and no defects were observed requiring remedial action. Next, I turn to the Vegetation Management Program. In lay terms, separate to inspections looking at the condition of network assets like the poles and the wires, vegetation inspections were focused upon things such as vegetation growing too close to the conductors. The frequency of inspection depended upon things like climate, typical vegetation types, and vegetation regrowth rates in the area. For an area such as Darawank, the essential energy expectations were that the area would be subject to a 2-year maintenance cycle. For example, every 2 years, network assets would be inspected, and if vegetation was found to be encroaching too close to those assets, then remedial work like trimming or cutting would be completed as part of that 2-yearly cycle. Your Honour, to be clear, not every branch of every tree that might hit conductors if the branch were to fall needed to be reported and removed under essential energy policy. If that were the policy, there would presumably be tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of trees that would need to be removed across the state. Instead, Essential Energy's Vegetation Management Program set out minimum distances to be maintained between conductors and vegetation. Those distances varied according to a number of factors, including voltage type in the conductors at the scene, the conductor type, the portion of the span, the length of the span, and whether or not the span was in a bushfire-prone area. Your Honour, an area might be classified as a bushfire-prone area even though it did not have a further bushfire risk classification of P1, high risk severity. Failford Road was and is a bushfire-prone area and therefore falls within this class even though it is not classified as P1, high risk severity. Applying the vegetation clearance requirements to the 111 metre long span between the poles on Failford Road, Mr Hargrave calculated there needed to be a clearance of 2.5 metres between conductor and vegetation for the first and last sixth of the span and 4 metres for the middle 2/3 of the span. This will become clearer as evidence is taken tomorrow, and Your Honour can see the way in which the management policies require different clearances around different parts of the span between two poles. Now, these estimates included an additional allowance reflecting the fact that Failford Road was in a bushfire-prone area, even though it was not within the P1 high-risk severity classification. So the 2.5 metres for the first and last sixth of the span and the 4 metres for the middle 2/3 of the span included an additional 0.5 of a metre because of the bushfire-prone area. Records showed the last inspection prior to the fire under this policy took place on 29 May 2018. This inspection identified an overhanging gum which needed to be trimmed because it was encroaching within clearance spaces required around the conductors. This particular overhang was trimmed on 19 July 2018. This was a different tree to the subject tree that then lost a branch or branches on 26 October 2019. The overhanging branch or branches that ultimately fell and started the Darawank fire were not encroaching within clearance spaces and did not need to be identified and remedied under essential energy vegetation management programs prior to the fire. That is, the evidence suggests the branches were outside the clearances that essential energy needed to maintain. This is confirmed by the expert evidence of Mr. Damar, based on his site observations, his review of the Google Street View photograph, and the assumption that the subject tree was located within Essential Energy's P2 moderate risk severity zone, as identified by Mr. Hargrave. The subject branch or branches were, however, close enough to the conductors to hit them as they fell. This invokes a consideration of how Essential Energy treated branches that overhang conductors, even though such branches were outside the minimum clearance distances. According to Mr. Hargrave, all overhangs were required to be visually inspected at the time of the cyclic inspection. If the overhanging branches encroached inside minimum clearance distances, then they needed to be identified and rectified so that they no longer encroached. If the overhanging branches were presently outside minimum clearance distances, but likely to grow into those minimum clearance distances within the 2-year cyclic maintenance period, then they were to be identified for remedial work like trimming or removal. And that work then needed to take place. So that aspect is anticipating vegetation growth into the clearance zone in the cyclic inspection period. If the overhanging branches did not encroach inside minimum clearance distances and were not thought likely to grow into minimum clearance distances before the next inspection, Mr. Hargrave says a risk-based approach was to be taken, looking at the structural integrity of the branches. On his evidence, this would involve a consideration of things like whether the overhang was structurally attached to the trunk without visible defects, whether it was dead, dying or diseased, or whether the overhang had the potential to fail and impact the mains within the maintenance period. In some high-risk rural areas, the Essential Energy Policy document called Vegetation Management Requirements for Network Assets imposed an additional requirement beyond the clearances I have outlined. This additional requirement is referred to within the brief as a clear to sky or clear to the sky requirement. Before quoting from the relevant Essential Energy Policy, the concept might be explained via this document from the Damar report at page 2-32 of the brief, which is itself taken from the ISSC3 Guide for the Management of Vegetation in the Vicinity of Electricity Assets. So, Your Honour, it would seem this is a guide for the industry as a whole, not just Essential Energy. The red hatched area is the minimum vegetation clearance, and the pale hatched area, the regrowth allowance around the conductors and the insulators and the pole that one can see there displayed. As the commentary to that diagram explains, clear to the sky vegetation hazard reduction measures involve the practice of removing all vegetation above the electricity assets to the width of the minimum clearing requirement. So it means what it says, Your Honour. It means that the area above those assets will be clear to the sky. Again, this does not apply to every tree and every conductor. Requirements to keep a space clear to the sky over high voltage distribution lines less than 33 kV is, according to Mr. DeMar, generalised to apply to assessed high-risk areas in bushfire-prone areas. This concept is then explained in a diagram from the Essential Energy Vegetation Management Requirements for Network Assets document, now displayed on the screen. The minimum clearance requirements are indicated in the circumference of the red circle surrounding the power pole. If clear to sky requirements applied at this scene, the area above the minimum vegetation clearance is to be treated as a continuous part of the minimum clearance zone. Accordingly, any vegetation overhanging the width of the minimum vegetation clearance requirements would need to be rectified, that means removed, if this were in an area where clear to sky applied. The Essential Energy Vegetation Management Plan provided clear to sky is required for bare conductors in high-risk rural areas. For all other rural areas, overhanging branches are to be removed where it can be done so at reasonable cost, utilising the typical employed resources, crew and plant, without the need to deploy higher cost specialised equipment or climbers. It is anticipated that this will result in overhang being generally removed in inland farming areas where native species do not grow to the heights or densities typically encountered in high rainfall coastal areas. Accordingly, the overhanging branch or branches that ultimately fell on Falford Road were not in a clear to sky clearance area, which would have mandated their removal prior to the fire, because Falford Road was not a high-risk rural area on Essential Energy's classification. Further, Mr Hargrave has reviewed records for the period 2014 to 26 October 2019 inclusive and determined there is no record of the subject branch being identified as an overhang branch. Mr DeMar observes that this does not necessarily mean that no overhang existed at that time. Expert opinion as to clear to sky requirements. As previously indicated, Mr DeMar undertook a site inspection of the subject area on 1 February 2022. At that time, he recorded the subject tree was approximately 8 metres from the closest conductor, with 2 fractured stubs evident. He says there was darkening on the surface wood at these fractured sites, consistent with about 27 months exposure to the elements. There were no signs of fire impact at the branch stubs or around the fracture sites. And I anticipate the court will hear from Mr DeMar that the subject branches could only have come from the subject tree. Mr DeMar concludes that certain branches from the subject tree were overhanging the minimum clearance zone as of May 2018, being the date of the Google Street View photograph, and he estimates they were probably overhanging at least as far back as 2014. Court will now return to the Google Street View imagery from May 2018, showing what Mr DeMar identifies as the subject tree overhang. You will note that Mr DeMar has identified the subject tree, the subject span, and the overhang. The court will next see a photograph taken by Mr Hargrave during his October 2019 inspection. Mr DeMar says that the black marks evident on the surface of this photograph taken by Mr Hargrave are burnt surface resins and cells which burnt as a result of contact with an energised high voltage conductor. Mr DeMar opines that the subject tree was not identifiable or classifiable as a hazard tree prior to the fire because it was generally in good health. Mr DeMar agrees with Mr Hargrave that close-up photographs of the large branch show internal termite damage within the branch, However, this would not have been externally apparent prior to the fire. I'll just have this photograph now removed, Your Honour, because this is not the large branch that had the termite damage evident. So both Mr DeMar and Mr Hargrave agree that close-up photographs of the large branch show internal termite damage within the branch. However, this wouldn't have been apparent to someone, externally apparent prior to the fire. Further, there would not have been discernible signs that the subject branches constituted an unacceptable risk of falling and thus required pruning or cutting or removal. However, Mr DeMar says that the subject tree had a very prominent overhang over and above the conductors toward the road edge, which posed a significant falling risk. Mr DeMar notes that as the subject area had been classified as P2 moderate risk severity zone, this meant that the Essential Energies clear to sky provisions would not automatically apply as they would in a P1 high risk severity zone. Instead, the clear to sky provisions would only apply at Essential Energies' discretion, subject to them having undertaken a risk assessment of the span in which the subject tree was located and the outcome of that risk assessment. A vegetation clearance contractor would not otherwise need to apply clear to sky cutting measures at the Falford Road site. Mr DeMar concludes that whilst the subject tree had a substantial overhang and the subject branches which fell were overhanging, Essential Energy complied with its own applicable standards and requirements established in its Vegetation Management Plan and Vegetation Management Requirements. Your Honour, this is where issues arise that will require further investigation at a Stage 2 hearing. Mr DeMar further opines that the results of the bushfire risk severity modelling commissioned by Essential Energy seem out of step with bushfire risk assessments undertaken pursuant to the development of statutory bushfire risk management plans, being the plans prepared by bushfire management committees and approved by the New South Wales Rural Fire Services Commissioner. I'll now have a page from the brief, page 21-72, brought up on screen. Mr DeMar observes that Essential Energies modelled bushfire risk severity mapping from their bushfire risk management plan, as displayed on the screen, does not appear to have any P1 high risk severity zone areas, so those marked in orange, anywhere in its networks along the coast and ranges north of Sydney. Mr DeMar draws a contrast with the Mid-Coast Bushfire Risk Management Plan. Within this plan, he says that the bushfire risk level assigned to settlements in the area where the Darawank fire actually burned is very high based on risk assessments undertaken for Diamond Beach and the Redhead Blackhead villages. And he further observed that other settlements have a risk rating of extreme, including areas within the Great Lakes area, even if those areas did not necessarily burn during the Darawank fire. Mr DeMar raised the prospect of a misalignment of bushfire risk between Essential Energies classifications and the assessments within the bushfire risk management plans. He suggests this is not limited to the Mid-Coast region, but is a systemic issue which manifests across a substantial proportion of Essential Energies network area. Your Honour, this clearly warrants further consideration and investigation by the court. Essential Energy and other parties with a sufficient interest in this matter need to be given a fair opportunity to respond to the contentions raised by Mr DeMar in his report, which they only received last month. They may wish to respond, whether by way of further statements from Essential Energy or by way of further expert evidence that they themselves commission. Your Honour's consideration of this important issue will only be assisted by a frank exchange of views on the topic, including expert opinion evidence. So this then is an issue, Your Honour, that is squarely raised on the evidence that you will shortly receive, but which will not be resolved during the limited cause and origin hearing this week. Rather, this important issue will be the focus of further written and oral evidence during a stage 2 hearing at a time to be fixed later in the year. So, Your Honour, I tender the 4-volume Falford Road Darawank Fire Brief of Evidence.
It'll be Exhibit 49A.
Thank you, Your Honour. Now, Your Honour, that concludes today's hearing into the Falford Road Darawank fire. If it's convenient to Your Honour, the matter will then reconvene tomorrow, and we have 3 witnesses, the 3 witnesses that I've outlined in my opening, due to give evidence tomorrow, starting with Mr. Paul Demar.
Thank you, Ms Ward. We'll adjourn now until 10 a.m. tomorrow.
Your Honour, just before you adjourn.
Sorry, just before we run.
Ms. Woodland, if I might be excused tomorrow, Ms. Woodland will be appearing in my place.
Certainly, Mr Newton. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, we'll adjourn now till 10 a.m. tomorrow.
Silence, please. All stand. This coroner's court is now adjourned.